December 26, 1944, at 4:50 in the afternoon. A single Sherman tank broke through the snow-covered ridge south of Bastogne. Its name was painted in white letters across the turret, Cobra King. Behind it, a column of armored vehicles stretched back through the frozen hills of Belgium. Inside the besieged town, men who had not slept in days heard the sound of metal grinding against ice, and tank tracks moving slowly forward. They looked at each other without speaking, because that sound meant only one thing. Patton had arrived. If you are watching this, you already know that this is not just another war story. This is about what happens when the impossible slowly becomes inevitable. 10 days earlier, the world had looked very different. On December 16, 1944, Adolf Hitler launched his final gamble in the West. 25 German divisions smashed through the hardened forest along a 75-mile front that was held by only 4 exhausted American divisions. The attack came at dawn without warning. The silence of the winter morning was shattered by the roar of artillery and the screech of German panzers tearing through the fog. Within hours, the American line began to collapse, and by the second day it was clear that this was not a small skirmish, but a massive offensive. The German army pushed westward, carving a deep bulge into Allied territory. Their ultimate objective was the port of Antwerp. If they reached it, they could split the Allied army's tanks in half, and possibly force a negotiated peace that would buy time for the collapsing Third Reich. But to reach Antwerp, they needed control of the roads in the Ardennes, and nearly all of those roads passed through one critical town. Bastogne was not a fortress city. It was simply a small crossroads town in southern Belgium where 7 major roads converged. Whoever controlled those roads controlled the entire region. Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower understood the importance of Bastogne immediately. On December 17th, he ordered the 101st Airborne Division to move there and hold the town at all costs. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe took command with just over 11,000 men, including paratroopers, glider infantry, and a few tanks from the 10th Armored Division Combat Command. They reached Bastogne only hours before the German forces closed in. By December 21st, the town was completely surrounded. There were no supply lines, no reinforcements, only deep snow, constant artillery fire, and the presence of German tanks surrounding the perimeter. Inside Bastogne, the American soldiers dug defensive positions wherever they could. They fortified cellars, placed machine gun nests in ruined buildings, and carefully rationed their ammunition. Each soldier was given only a small amount of ammunition and a few grenades. They were ordered to fire only when absolutely necessary. The weather grew increasingly brutal as temperatures dropped below freezing and thick fog grounded Allied aircraft. Without air support or supply drops, the men inside the town endured hunger, exhaustion, and constant bombardment. On December 22nd, a German officer approached the American lines under a white flag, carrying a typed message from General Heinrich Freiherr von Lüttwitz, demanding the immediate surrender of Bastogne. The message was formal and direct. McAuliffe was given 2 hours to decide. Surrender or the town would be destroyed by artillery. McAuliffe read the message silently and then looked at his officers, asking what he should reply. One officer jokingly suggested a single word: nuts. McAuliffe liked the answer. He wrote that one word on the response sheet and handed it back to the German officer. The German commander did not understand the meaning at first, so an American officer explained that it essentially meant go to hell. While the defenders of Bastogne held their positions, events were unfolding far to the south. General George S. Patton was preparing his 3rd United States Army for an offensive into Germany when news arrived that the German army had broken through the Ardennes. Patton was ordered to send part of his armored forces north immediately to slow the German advance. Soon afterward, he was summoned to a meeting with Eisenhower in Verdun, France. Before leaving for the meeting, Patton instructed his staff to prepare 3 contingency plans that would allow his army to pivot 90 degrees and move north toward Bastogne if necessary. When he arrived at the conference in Verdun on December 19th, Eisenhower explained the desperate situation. The Germans had pushed deep into Allied territory and surrounded Bastogne. Eisenhower asked Patton how quickly he could turn his army north and attack the German flank. Patton answered immediately that he could launch an attack with 3 divisions within 48 hours. Many officers in the room thought the claim was impossible. Patton's army was more than 150 miles away and already engaged in operations on another front. Moving an entire army in the middle of winter under combat conditions seemed unrealistic. But Patton had already prepared for exactly that possibility. After leaving the meeting, he called his chief of staff and gave the signal to begin the movement. Within 72 hours, Patton successfully repositioned 6 divisions, more than 250,000 soldiers, over 130,000 vehicles, and tens of thousands of tons of supplies. The massive redeployment took place through snow-covered roads, icy hills, and mud. Many units drove for more than 18 hours without rest. It was one of the fastest large-scale military redeployments in American history. While Patton's army raced north toward Bastogne, the soldiers inside the town continued to fight desperately. On December 23rd, the weather finally cleared, allowing American aircraft to fly over Bastogne for the first time in days. Transport planes dropped desperately needed supplies by parachute, including ammunition, food, and medical equipment. The men on the ground cheered and rushed to gather the crates, even while German artillery shells exploded around them. However, the supplies were limited and the German attacks continued. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, German forces launched a major assault with tanks and infantry against the western perimeter of Bastogne. The fighting was brutal and close. Tanks rolled over American foxholes, while machine guns and anti-tank weapons fired at point-blank range. Despite heavy pressure, the American lines held. Meanwhile, Patton's armored divisions fought their way north through German defenses, minefields, and roadblocks. Progress was slow and costly, but Patton constantly pushed his troops forward. He ordered commanders not to stop, not to wait, but to keep moving toward Bastogne. Finally, on December 26th, the lead elements of the 4th Armored Division reached the final German defensive positions south of the town. First, Lieutenant Charles Bulge led the advance in his heavily armored Sherman tank, known as Cobra King. Behind him followed additional tanks and armored infantry commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton. Abrams. After a powerful artillery bombardment cleared the way, the tanks advanced through German defenses and smashed through roadblocks and bunkers. After fierce fighting, the tank column finally reached American soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division near the outskirts of Bastogne. At 4:50 p.m. on December 26, 1944, the siege of Bastogne was officially broken. The corridor opened by the tanks was narrow and still under heavy German artillery fire, but it allowed supplies, reinforcements, and medical evacuation to begin again. The defenders had survived. In the weeks that followed, Allied forces pushed the German army back and eventually closed the bulge created by the offensive. By January 25th, the German attack had completely failed. The battle became known as the Battle of the Bulge, one of the largest and most costly battles fought by American forces during World War II. The relief of Bastogne became one of the defining moments of the battle. It demonstrated the speed and determination of Patton's army and the resilience of the soldiers who defended the town against overwhelming odds. Tens of thousands of soldiers were killed or wounded during the battle, but the Allied lines held and the German offensive collapsed. Patton later wrote that the relief of Bastogne was the most brilliant operation his army had performed during the war. Yet the true victory belonged to the exhausted soldiers who had endured freezing temperatures, constant shelling, and relentless attacks, while refusing to surrender. Their determination turned what had begun as a disaster of tanks into a historic victory that helped ensure the final defeat of Nazi Germany.